I sat in the freezing conference room, watching my brother stand up as if the world had already signed everything over to him. My mother nodded along, while his wife smiled like she was ready to buy a new car with someone else's money. When he finally announced that everything was his, I did not argue. I just placed a folder on the table and asked him one question. "Are you sure you have ever seen Grandpa's real signature? My name is Ivy Harrison, and I have spent 35 years learning how to be invisible in a room full of people who claim to love me." The conference room at Klein and Marrow Legal Group was designed to make you feel small. It was a cavern of dark, polished mahogany and leather chairs that smelled of old money and stern judgments, situated in the heart of Hollowcrest, Ohio. The office had a view of the gray street below, where the late autumn wind was currently stripping the last few leaves from the oak trees. Inside, however, the air was stagnant, recycled through vents that hummed with a low, monotonous drone. It was the perfect atmosphere for a funeral of the soul, which was exactly what my family assumed this meeting was going to be for me. I sat in the chair closest to the heavy oak door. This was my designated spot in the family geography. It was the seat for the stragglers, the latecomers, or the irrelevant. It was the position of the person who might need to slip out early to take a phone call that no one else considered important. To them, I was just Ivy the dreamer, the freelance commercial photographer who spent her days adjusting lighting rigs and editing shadows at Ridgeway Creative House. They saw my job as a cute hobby that somehow paid rent, not a career that required a forensic level of observation. That was their mistake. Photography had taught me how to look at a scene and see the cracks in the foundation, the forced smiles, and the tension held in a jawline. And right now, looking through my mental lens, the composition of this room was screaming with deceit. At the head of the long, oval table stood my brother, Derek Bennett. He had not waited for Mr. Klein, the senior partner and my grandfather's longtime attorney, to call the meeting to order. Derek never waited for permission. He was the firstborn, the golden son, the man who walked into a room and sucked all the oxygen out of it simply because he believed he deserved to breathe more than anyone else. Derek was wearing a suit that I knew cost more than $3,000. It was a navy blue power suit, tailored to hide the slight softening of his midsection that had started when he hit 40. His hair was gelled back with military precision, and he wore a watch that caught the overhead fluorescent light every time he gestured. He looked every inch the CEO he desperately wanted to be. He stood with his hands flat on the table, leaning forward, his weight resting on his palms. It was a dominance pose he had probably learned from a TED Talk or a business seminar on how to intimidate your subordinates. To his right sat my mother, Elaine Bennett. She was looking up at him with an expression that bordered on religious adoration. In her eyes, Derek could do no wrong. He was the validation of her parenting, the proof that she had raised a success. She wore black. Of course, a tasteful, expensive morning dress that she had bought specifically for this week, but her grief seemed performative, a necessary accessory to the main event, which was the transference of power. She did not look at me. She rarely did when Derek was performing. I was the background noise. Derek was the symphony. On Derek's other side was his wife, Tiffany. She was vibrating with suppressed energy. Her hand kept darting out to touch Derek's forearm, a light, possessive stroke against the expensive fabric of his sleeve. It looked like affection, but to me, it looked like ownership. It was the way a person touches a winning lottery ticket to make sure it is still real. She was smiling, a tight, controlled expression that did not quite reach her eyes. I knew that look. It was the look of a woman who had already browsed the listings for luxury SUVs and was just waiting for the check to clear. Scattered around the rest of the table were the others. Aunt Loretta was there, along with a few cousins who had drifted into the orbit of the estate hoping for gravity to drop something in their laps. They were the audience. They were necessary because Derek needed witnesses to his coronation. "We all know why we are here," Derek said. His voice was a rich baritone, practiced and projected. He sounded reasonable. He sounded logical. He sounded like a man who was burdened by duty, but willing to shoulder the load for the good of the tribe. Grandpa Walter built something incredible, a legacy, And now that he is gone, that legacy is vulnerable. I kept my face perfectly still. I crossed my legs and rested my hands on my lap. Right next to my bag, it was a beat-up leather satchel that held my camera gear and my laptop, but today, it held something else. Derek continued, pacing slightly behind his chair now. I have spent the last few weeks looking over the numbers. The portfolio is messy. Grandpa was sentimental. He let things slide. Rents are 20% below market value in some of the residential units. The commercial spaces on 4th Street are being underutilized. It is a bleeding wound in terms of potential revenue. He paused for effect, looking around the room to ensure everyone was following his narrative. I know this is a difficult time, Derek said, dropping his voice to a somber register that felt as fake as a plastic flower. But we have to be practical. Mom needs stability. The family needs leadership. We cannot afford to let Grandpa's emotional attachments drag the estate into bankruptcy. That was a lie. I knew it was a lie. Grandpa Walter's estate was nowhere near bankruptcy. The 9 rental houses were debt-free. The 2 commercial buildings were anchors of the community. But Derek needed a crisis so he could sell himself as the savior. That is why, Derek said, puffing out his chest slightly. I am stepping up. I have told Mr. Klein that I am willing to take on the full administration of the assets. It is going to be a lot of work. It is going to take hours of my time every week. Time I will have to take away from my own business. But I'm willing to do it. Everything is mine to manage now. I will consolidate the titles, refinance where necessary to pull out equity for repairs, and get this ship sailing the right way. Everything is mine. The words hung in the air. He had phrased it as mine to manage, but the subtext was clear. He viewed the estate as his personal kingdom. My mother nodded vigorously. It is what your grandfather would have wanted. Derek. He always knew you had the head for business. Ivy has her art. She said the word art, the way one might say measles, something unfortunate but tolerable. She is not built for the stress of property management. You are doing her a favor, really. Tiffany squeezed Derek's arm again, her nails digging in slightly. You are so generous. Honey, taking all this on. I watched them. I watched the way Aunt Loretta leaned in, calculating how Derek's benevolence might trickle down to her. I watched the way the cousins shifted, accepting the new hierarchy without question. And then I looked at Mr. Chaim Klein. Howard Klein was a man of 70 years, with skin like crumpled parchment and eyes that were sharp as flint. He sat at the far end of the table, his hands folded over a thick file. He had not said a word since we walked in. He had simply watched Derek parade around the room. There was no annoyance on his face, but there was no approval either. There was only a profound, terrifying patience. He was waiting. He caught my eye for a split second. It was the briefest of flickers, barely a millisecond of contact, but it was enough. He knew that I knew. I looked back at Derek. He was glowing. He was in his element. He was talking about optimizing tax structures and streamlining tenant relations. He was using buzzwords to sanitize his greed. He did not care about Mrs. Vega in the duplex on Elm Street, who had lived there for 15 years and grew tomatoes for the whole neighborhood. He did not care about the Henderson family, who ran the shoe repair shop in the commercial unit and fixed the local kids' backpacks for free. He saw them as line items. He saw them as obstacles to a higher cap rate. He saw the buildings as piles of wood and brick that could be squeezed until they bled cash. Grandpa Walter had hated that attitude. He had despised the churn and burn mentality of modern landlords. A house is a promise, Ivy. He had told me once, his voice raspy from the illness, but his mind clear. You put a roof over someone's head. You are making a deal with them. They pay you to keep the rain off them. You do not gouge them just because you can. Derek did not understand promises. He only understood leverage. So, Derek said, clapping his hands together, signaling that his monologue was concluding. Mr. Klein, I have the preliminary paperwork drawn up by my own counsel to expedite the transfer of administrative rights. I think we can wrap this up quickly today. No need to drag out the pain, right? He smiled at me then. It was a pitying smile. Ivy, do not worry. I will make sure you get a stipend. Enough to help with your projects. You will not have to worry about a thing. The arrogance was breathtaking. It was a physical force, pushing against my chest. He genuinely believed he had already won. He believed that because he was the loudest, the oldest, and the most expensive suit in the room, the universe would naturally bend to his will. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't anger. Anger is hot and messy. This was cold. This was the feeling of standing on the edge of a frozen lake, watching someone skate toward the thin ice, waving their arms and shouting about how strong they are. You don't hate them. You just brace yourself for the sound of the cracking. I did not realize I was going to speak until I heard my own voice. It was steady, calm, and cut through the humid air of Derek's self-congratulation like a razor. Stipend, I repeated. Derek blinked, surprised that the furniture was talking. Excuse me, you said you would give me a stipend, I said, leaning back in my chair. From the rental income. Well, yes, Derek said, his tone shifting to that of a patient parent explaining calculus to a toddler. It is complicated, Ivy. Expenses are high. But I want to take care of you. That is what big brothers do. And the titles? I asked. You mentioned consolidating the titles. It is a legal necessity, he said dismissively. To secure better financing, you do not need to bore yourself with the details. I think I do, I said. My mother made a tutting sound. Ivy, please, do not be difficult. Derek has worked so hard on this presentation. I am not being difficult. Mom, I said, turning my gaze to her. I am being practical, just like you always told me to be. I reached down to my bag. The leather felt cool under my fingers. Inside, there was a thin file folder. It was unremarkable. It was just a standard manila folder that you could buy at any office supply store for a few cents, but the single sheet of paper inside it was heavier than the table we were sitting at. It was heavier than the building we were in. I pulled the folder out and set it on the polished mahogany surface. The sound it made, a soft thwap, was quiet, but in the sudden silence of the room, it sounded like a gunshot. Derek stared at the folder. What is that? You asked for the details. I said, you have been talking for 20 minutes about what you're going to do with Grandpa's property, about how you're going to raise rents and kick out families and refinance the equity to buy yourself, to invest in the future. I never said kick out families, Derek snapped, his face flushing slightly. I said market adjustments. Same thing to the people living there, I replied. I rested my hand on the folder. You seem very confident that Grandpa Walter left this all for you to play with. He was my grandfather, Derek said, his voice hardening. I am the eldest. I am the only one with business experience. Who else would he leave it to you? He laughed, a short, sharp bark. Ivy, you cannot even manage your own car insurance renewal without panicking. Do you really think Grandpa would trust you with a multi-million-dollar portfolio? Tiffany smirked. Aunt Loretta whispered something to her neighbor. He didn't trust me with a portfolio, I said softly. He trusted me with a responsibility. I looked at Derek, really looked at him. I saw the greed in his eyes, masked as ambition. I saw the contempt he held for me, masked as concern. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that he had never really known our grandfather at all. He knew the net worth. He didn't know the man. Are you sure, Derek? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Are you 100% sure you know what Grandpa signed in the last 6 months of his life? Derek hesitated. For the first time since he stood up, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. It was tiny, a hairline fracture in the facade, but then he looked at Mom, who was nodding encouragingly, and he looked at Tiffany, and he looked at his expensive watch. Of course I'm sure, he scoffed. Grandpa was in hospice. He was barely lucid. He didn't sign anything significant without Mom or me knowing about it. He was lucid, I said, and he was very specific. I slid the folder across the table. It stopped exactly halfway between us. Open it, I said. Derek stared at the folder as if it were a bomb. He didn't move. The silence in the room stretched out, thin and taut. Go on, Derek, I said, and this time, I let a little bit of the ice seep into my voice. If everything is yours, then a piece of paper shouldn't scare you. This was it. The trap had been dug 4 years ago. But today was the day he finally stepped onto the leaves covering the pit. I sat back in my chair near the door. The unimportant sister, the dreamer, the failure. And I watched my brother reach out his hand to destroy himself, to understand why I slid that folder across the table with such terrifying calm. You have to understand the 4 years of silence that preceded it. You have to understand that in my family, grief was not measured in tears or black clothing. It was measured in spreadsheets. The clock had started ticking exactly 48 months ago. It was a Tuesday. I remember it was a Tuesday because the waiting room at the oncology center had been serving stale donuts, and the television in the corner was playing a rerun of a game show where people screamed over winning a toaster. The doctor had come in, looking tired, and told us that Grandpa Walter had stage 4 lung cancer. The word terminal was not used immediately, but it hung in the room like a heavy, suffocating drape. I felt like someone had punched a hole through my chest. Grandpa was the only person who made sense to me. He was the only one who didn't look at my life and see a series of errors. But while I was trying to remember how to breathe, I saw my brother blink, just once. It was a slow, deliberate blink, like a camera shutter clicking shut and processing a new image. In that split second, Derek did not see a dying grandfather. He saw a portfolio opening up. Grandpa Walter owned 9 single-family rental homes and 2 commercial spaces on the busiest street in Hollowcrest. He had bought them decades ago, back when the neighborhood was rough and nobody wanted to invest here. He had fixed them up with his own hands, sanding floors until his knees were bruised and painting walls until his shoulders locked up. Over 30 years, those properties had become a goldmine. They generated a steady, robust stream of cash that had paid for Derek's business degree, my failed attempt at one, and my mother's comfortable lifestyle. To Grandpa, those 11 properties were a community he had built. To Derek, they were an asset class that was being mismanaged. It took less than 3 weeks for the sharks to start circling. The first time it happened, we were having a family dinner. Grandpa was still strong enough to sit at the head of the table, though his appetite was gone. He picked at his mashed potatoes while Derek cut into a steak with surgical precision. I have been looking at the books, Derek said, casually, as if discussing the weather. We need to talk about tax optimization. Grandpa looked up, his eyes weary. Optimization. You are bleeding money on maintenance, Derek said, chewing thoughtfully. And the rents are archaic. I checked the comps in the area. You are charging the Vegas and the Millers about 30% less than market rate. If we adjust that, and maybe cut back on the reactive repairs by switching to cheaper contractors, we could increase the net operating income significantly before the fiscal year ends. It would help with the estate taxes later. Later? He meant when you are dead. I dropped my fork. It clattered against the china, loud and sharp. He is not dead yet. Derek, I snapped. My mother, Elaine, shot me a look that could have frozen boiling water. Ivy, please, your brother is being practical. We have to think about the future. That was the word they used to beat me into submission. Practical, in the Bennett household. Being practical meant stripping away all human emotion until only the numbers remained. It was why I was the disappointment. I had dropped out of the business administration program at the state university 3 years prior. I could not do it. I could not sit in classes where professors taught us how to maximize profit by minimizing human dignity. I could not view employees as resources to be exploited or customers as wallets to be drained. I became a photographer because a camera lens forced you to see the truth, but to my mother, I was just Ivy the dreamer, Ivy the flake, Ivy who worked part-time and took pictures for catalogs and could not be trusted with real adult decisions. You need to be more like your brother. Mom told me that night in the kitchen. While I aggressively scrubbed the dishes, Derek has a vision. He understands how the world works. You cannot pay bills with sentimentality. Ivy. So I stopped arguing. I stopped trying to explain that maybe the reason the tenant stayed for 10 years was because Grandpa didn't raise the rent every time the wind blew. I retreated into the background, which was exactly where they wanted me. But while Derek was busy building spreadsheets and researching property management software, I was the one driving to Grandpa's house every morning. For 4 years, my life became a rhythm of caretaking. As the cancer ate away at his lungs, Grandpa's world shrank to the size of his bedroom. I was the one who learned how to adjust the flow on his oxygen tank. I was the one who learned how to blend his food so he could swallow it without choking. I was the one who sat by his bed for hours, editing photos on my laptop while he slept, listening to the rasp of his breathing, terrified that each silence might be the last. Derek visited, of course. He came on Sundays, dressed in his golf clothes or a sharp suit, checking his watch every 10 minutes. He never brought food. He never offered to change the sheets. He brought documents. He would sit by the bed, open a file, and say things like, "Grandpa, I need you to sign this authorization for the bank." Or, "Grandpa, I am thinking we should put the Elm Street house under an LLC to limit liability." Grandpa would sign, his hand shaking, his signature becoming a spiderweb of trembling ink. He was too tired to fight. He just wanted Derek to stop talking so he could rest. But in the quiet hours, after Derek had left to go play golf or meet a client, Grandpa would talk to me. He did not talk about money. He talked about the houses. He told me the history of every single floorboard. "That house on Maple," he whispered one afternoon, his voice thin as paper. "The basement floods if it rains for 3 days straight. You have to go down and check the sump pump. The switch gets stuck. You have to wiggle it." I grabbed my notebook. I wrote it down. "Maple Street, sump pump switch, wiggle it, and the commercial unit," he wheezed. "Where the cobbler is. The roof flashes are old. If snow piles up, it leaks into the back room. You have to get someone up there to clear it, or it ruins Mr. Henderson's leather stock." I wrote that down too. Over the months, I filled 3 notebooks. I learned the names of every tenant's children. I learned which boiler needed to be coaxed on cold mornings, and which neighbor complained if the grass wasn't cut on a Thursday. I learned the heartbeat of the estate. Derek knew the market value of the buildings. I knew how to keep them standing. One rainy afternoon, about 6 months before the end, the atmosphere in the house changed. Derek had just left after a particularly aggressive pitch about selling 2 of the properties to fund a diversified investment portfolio. He had been loud, pushing hard, telling Grandpa that holding on to old real estate was financial suicide. Grandpa had closed his eyes and feigned sleep until Derek finally huffed and walked out. I was sitting in the armchair, editing a photo of a wedding cake, trying to ignore the knot of anger in my stomach. "Ivy," Grandpa said. His voice was stronger than it had been all day. I looked up. He was watching me. His eyes, usually clouded with pain and medication, were startlingly clear. "He does not care about them." Grandpa said. I knew he wasn't talking about the properties. He was talking about the people inside them. "He cares about the legacy," I said, parroting my mother's favorite line. "He wants to make sure what you built lasts." Grandpa made a sound that was half laugh, half cough. "He wants the kingdom, Ivy. He does not want the crown. The crown is heavy. The crown hurts your neck. He just wants to sit on the throne and point." He shifted in the bed, wincing as his bones settled against the mattress. I got up to adjust his pillows, but he waved me away. "He came here today asking about the profit margins on the duplex again," Grandpa said. "He asked me why I haven't evicted Mrs. Vega. He said he could get $500 more a month from a young professional couple." Mrs. Vega. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Mrs. Vega brings you soup every Tuesday. She has lived there since I was in high school." "Exactly," Grandpa said. "But to Derek, she is just an inefficiency. He looks at a home and sees a square footage number multiplied by a $sign. That is dangerous. Ivy, a landlord who does not see people is a tyrant, And tyrants eventually get overthrown. He fell silent for a long time. The only sound was the rhythmic hiss-click of the oxygen concentrator. I went back to my laptop, but I couldn't focus. Then, he asked me the question. It was a question so strange, so out of left field, that I thought perhaps the morphine was making him hallucinate. "Ivy," he said, "if a person in this family, if someone were to submit a piece of paper that wasn't real, a fake document, what do you think would happen?" I paused, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. "What do you mean?" "Grandpa? Like a forged check?" "No," he said slowly, staring at the ceiling. "Like a legal document, a will, or a power of attorney. If someone wanted something badly enough, and they thought nobody was looking, and they presented a lie as the truth to a court or a bank, what happens?" I turned my chair to face him fully. "Grandpa, that is a felony. That is fraud. They would go to jail." He nodded. A tiny, almost imperceptible movement. "Yes, they would." "Why are you asking me that?" I asked, a cold chill running down my spine. He turned his head and looked at me. There was a sadness in his gaze that broke my heart, but underneath the sadness, there was steel. "Because, Ivy," he said softly, "I need to know if you have the stomach for what comes next. Derek thinks he is playing a game of Monopoly. He thinks he can just roll the dice and buy everything. But real life has rules. And if you break the rules in the real world, you don't just lose a turn, you lose everything." He reached out his hand, and I took it. His skin was dry and cool. "He wants to own," Grandpa whispered, "but he doesn't want to be responsible. That is his fatal flaw. And I am afraid, my dear, that he is going to prove it very soon." I did not know then what he meant. I thought he was speaking hypothetically. I thought he was just an old man wrestling with the disappointment of a son who loved money more than his father. I squeezed his hand and told him not to worry, that I would handle the soup for Mrs. Vega, that I would call the plumber for the leak on Maple Street. But looking back, that was the moment everything changed. That was the moment Grandpa Walter stopped being a victim of his illness and started planning his final act. He had seen the wolf at the door, and he realized the wolf was wearing his grandson's expensive suit. And while Mom was busy praising Derek for his business acumen, and while Derek was busy calculating how soon he could buy a Porsche with the estate money, Grandpa was busy teaching me. He wasn't just teaching me how to be a landlord, he was teaching me how to be a witness. He knew Derek would not be able to help himself. He knew that when the end came, Derek's greed would outpace his intelligence. Grandpa was counting on it. So when I sat in that conference room 4 years later and asked Derek about the signature, it wasn't a bluff. I had been in the room when the real conversations happened. I had been the one holding the pen when Grandpa practiced his signature to see how shaky it had become. I knew exactly what his hand was capable of in those final months, and more importantly, I knew what it wasn't capable of. I knew that any document claiming to be signed with a steady, firm hand in the last 6 months of his life was a lie. And I knew that because I was the only one who had actually been there to hold that hand while it trembled. The education of a landlord does not happen in a classroom. And it certainly does not happen in the kind of glossy seminars my brother Derek paid $5,000 to attend. It happens in crawl spaces that smell like wet earth and rusted iron. It happens on rooftops in the middle of a sleet storm. It happens at kitchen tables where a single mother is counting out wrinkled $20 bills, hoping you will not count them too quickly and realize she is short. Over those 4 years, while Derek was busy projecting future yields and fantasizing about how he would spend the rent money, Grandpa Walter was quietly enrolling me in the most intensive masterclass of my life. He did not give me a syllabus. He gave me a ring of keys and a list of phone numbers that he kept in a battered blue address book. The lessons usually started when I arrived in the morning to check his vitals. He would be sitting up in bed, looking frail but focused, like a general commanding troops from a bunker. "The duplex on Sycamore," he would say, his voice scratching against the silence. "The upstairs unit. The bathroom sink drains slow. It is not a clog. The pipe has a weird angle because the house settled back in '98. You do not call a plumber for that. Ivy, a plumber will charge you $200 to snake it, and it will not fix the geometry." You go over there with a bottle of the heavy-duty enzyme cleaner, the stuff in the green bottle, and you pour half of it down. You let it sit for 6 hours. You tell the tenant, do not run the water until dinner. That solves it for 6 months. I would write it down. Sycamore, enzyme cleaner, green bottle. And the roof on the commercial block, he would continue. The flashing around the chimney near the shoe repair shop. It lifts when the wind comes from the north. If the forecast says nor'easter, you call Miller. He is the only roofer in town who won't try to sell you a whole new roof when you only need a bucket of tar and 10 minutes of labor. You call Miller, and you tell him Walter sent you, and you make sure he wears his harness because he is getting too old to be sliding around up there. I did not just write these things down. I lived them. I became the ghost in the machine of my grandfather's estate. I was the one meeting Miller at 7 in the morning to watch him patch the flashing. I was the one driving to the hardware store to buy the specific brand of enzyme cleaner because Grandpa swore the generic stuff was just watered-down bleach. Derek had no idea. To Derek, the properties were just addresses on a spreadsheet. He thought they ran on magic. He thought that you just bought a building, and once a month, money appeared in your bank account like manna from heaven. He did not know about the late-night panic when a furnace pilot light went out. He did not know about the delicate negotiation of replacing a carpet that a tenant's cat had ruined without making the tenant feel like a criminal. Grandpa made sure I knew the people, not just the problems. Go see Marisol Vega, he told me one afternoon. It was the 3rd of the month, and her rent check hadn't arrived. If it had been Derek, he would have sent a late notice immediately. He would have slapped on the $50 late fee allowed by the lease, but Grandpa just shook his head. She is not dodging us, he said. Her mother is in the nursing home on the west side. If Marisol is late, it is because she had to buy medication that Medicare did not cover. Go see her. Do not ask for the money. Just ask how her mother is. So I went. I drove to the small blue house on Elm Street, the one with the porch that leaned slightly to the left. Marisol opened the door, looking exhausted, her uniform from the diner still smelling of grease and coffee. When she saw me, her face crumbled. I have it, Ivy, she said, her hands trembling as she reached into her pocket. I have most of it. I just need until Friday for the last $60. I am not here for the check. Marisol, I said. Walter wanted to know if your mom liked the flowers he sent last week. She stopped. She looked at me, and then she looked at the empty street behind me, expecting a collection agent. When she realized I was telling the truth, she invited me in. We sat at her kitchen table for an hour. She told me about her mother's dementia, about the struggle to keep her job while managing the care. I listened. I saw the water stain on the ceiling she hadn't reported, because she was afraid of being a nuisance. I took a picture of it with my phone and sent it to Miller immediately. When I left, she handed me the envelope. It was $40 short, not $60. Keep it until Friday, I said, and I'm sending someone to look at that ceiling tomorrow. It is on the house. When I told Grandpa, he closed his eyes and smiled. Good, he whispered. A tenant who trusts you will protect your property. A tenant who fears you will hide the damage until it is too expensive to fix. Derek does not understand that. He thinks fear is a management tool. Fear is just rust, Ivy. It eats everything eventually. Then there was the Henderson family. They ran the shoe repair shop in one of the commercial units downtown. It was a dying art, cobbling. But Mr. Henderson was a magician with leather. The shop smelled of polish and dust and hard work. I started stopping by there once a week, ostensibly to check the HVAC system, but really to learn the rhythm of their business. Mr. Henderson showed me how the vibration from the heavy stitching machines was slowly cracking the linoleum in the back room. I can pay to fix it, he offered, looking worried. I do not want to lose the lease. We will split it, I told him, quoting a policy Grandpa had whispered to me the night before. You are improving the space. We will cover the materials. You cover the labor. That is fair. He looked at me with a mixture of relief and respect. You are a lot like your grandfather. Miss Ivy, your brother came by here last week. He stood in the doorway. Didn't even come in. He asked me if I knew that a coffee shop would pay double the rent I am paying. Then he just walked away. I felt a cold spike of anger in my chest. Derek was already shopping the space. He was already planning to evict a family business that had been there for 20 years, just to get a trendy espresso bar that would probably go bust in 18 months. I went home that night and created a file. I called it the Legacy Protocol. I started documenting everything. I scanned every receipt for every repair I authorized. I took photos of the fixed ceiling at Marisol's, the new floor at the Hendersons, the patched roof, the replaced water heaters. I created a digital paper trail that proved who was actually maintaining the value of the estate. It wasn't for glory. I didn't show it to my mother. I didn't post it on social media. I did it because I was starting to realize that I was the curator of a museum that my brother wanted to burn down for the insurance money. Grandpa watched me. He saw the files on my laptop. He saw the way I negotiated with the plumber to get a bulk rate for the annual inspections. You know why I never brought Derek into this? Grandpa asked me one rainy Tuesday. I was organizing his medication on the bedside table. Because he is busy with his consulting firm, I suggested, trying to be diplomatic. Because he is lazy, Grandpa said. The word was flat and hard. Derek likes the idea of being a landlord. He likes saying my properties at cocktail parties, but he hates the work. He thinks he is too good to look at a clogged toilet. He thinks he is too important to listen to a woman crying about her mother. He took a shallow breath, the oxygen machine hissing in rhythm. There are two kinds of owners, Ivy. There are the ones who build, and there are the ones who extract. Derek is an extractor. If I give him these buildings, within 5 years, he will have raised the rents until the good people leave. He will defer maintenance to keep the cash flow high. Then, when the systems start failing, he will sell them off one by one to some faceless corporation. The neighborhood will suffer, the families will suffer, and everything I worked for since 1972 will be gone. He looked at me, his eyes burning. I am not afraid of dying. Ivy, I am 84 years old. I have had a good run. I am afraid of my life's work becoming nothing more than a line item on Derek's tax return. That night, the conversation shifted. It was late, past 11 o'clock. The house was quiet. My mother had gone home hours ago after complaining that the smell of medicine was giving her a headache. Grandpa motioned for me to come closer. He reached under his pillow and pulled out a key. It was a small, silver key that opened the lockbox he kept in his closet. "Open it," he said. I retrieved the box and set it on the bed. Inside, there wasn't cash or gold. There was a draft of a document. "I am going to do something," he said. "And you have to trust me. It is going to seem aggressive. It is going to make your mother scream. It is going to make Derek furious. But it is the only way." I looked at the papers. I saw legal terms I vaguely recognized. Limited liability company, asset transfer, quitclaim deed. "I thought we were doing a will," I said. "I thought you were going to leave the houses to me in the will." "A will is a suggestion that people fight over," Grandpa said. "A will is an invitation for a lawsuit. Derek will contest a will. He will say I was senile. He will say you manipulated me. He will drag you through probate court for 3 years until the legal fees eat up half the equity. I have seen it happen to my friends." He placed his hand on the papers. "We are not going to do a will. Ivy, we are going to do a transfer, now, while I am alive, while I can look the notary in the eye and tell them exactly what I am doing." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Grandpa, if you transfer them now, Derek will find out. He checks the county records." "He checks the Zillow estimates," Grandpa corrected. "He does not check the county clerk's daily filings. He is too arrogant to think he needs to watch the details. He thinks the prize is already in the bag." He looked at me with an intensity that made me want to cry. "But we cannot call this an inheritance," he said firmly. "Inheritance is what you get when someone dies. It is free money. This is a job. I am hiring you. Ivy, I am hiring you to be the custodian of these promises. The house on Elm is a promise to Marisol. The shop downtown is a promise to the Hendersons. I am transferring the ownership to you because you are the only one who intends to keep the promises." He leaned back, exhausted by the speech. "It is going to be a secret," he whispered. "A poison pill. We set it up. We sign it. We file it quietly. And then we wait. We let Derek strut. We let him plan. We let him think he is the king. And when the moment comes when he reaches out to take what isn't his." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I understood. The houses weren't just assets. They were ammunition. "Go call Howard Klein," Grandpa said, closing his eyes. "Tell him we are ready to execute the transfer, and tell him to bring the video camera. I want to make sure the world sees that I was smiling when I did it." I sat there in the dim light of the bedroom, listening to the rain hit the window. I looked at the fragile old man who had spent his life building a shelter for others, and I looked at the paperwork that would turn me into his soldier. I wasn't just the granddaughter with the camera anymore. I was the designated survivor, and for the first time, I realized that the heavy folder in my bag wasn't a burden. It was a shield. The silence in Howard Klein's office was different from the silence in the hospital room. In the hospital, the silence was heavy with waiting, filled with the dread of the inevitable end. In Howard's office, the silence was sharp. It was the silence of a chess player who has just seen the winning move 5 turns ahead. Howard Klein was a man who seemed to be carved out of the same mahogany that made up his desk. He was not a flashy television lawyer. He did not wave his arms or make passionate speeches. He was precise, meticulous, and terrifyingly competent. He was the kind of attorney who read the footnotes of the footnotes. When Grandpa Walter and I arrived at his office 2 weeks after that rainy night conversation, Howard had everything ready. He did not offer us coffee. He offered us a strategy. "We are establishing a limited liability company," Howard said, placing a stack of documents on the desk. "It will be called Ironwood Holdings, a neutral name, boring, unmemorable, exactly what we want." I sat in the leather chair, feeling like an imposter. "And this company?" I asked, my voice wavering. "Who owns it?" "You do," Howard said. 100% membership interest assigned to Ivy Harrison. Effective immediately upon signature. He slid the papers toward me. "Walter is transferring the deeds of all 9 residential properties and the 2 commercial units into this LLC," Howard continued. "It is a quit-claim transfer. It is aggressive, but it is clean. Once these are filed with the county clerk, the properties no longer belong to Walter Bennett. They belong to Ironwood Holdings, and since you are Ironwood Holdings, they belong to you." I looked at Grandpa. He was sitting next to me, dressed in his best Sunday suit, though the collar hung loose around his shrinking neck. He looked determined. "Grandpa," I whispered, "do you know what is going to happen when they find out Mom is going to scream? Derek is going to destroy me. He will say I stole them. He will say I tricked you." "That is why we are not just signing papers," Grandpa said. He reached out and tapped the table with a bony finger. "We are building a fortress." Howard nodded. He pressed a button on his intercom. "Send them in." The door opened, and 3 people walked in. One was a notary public I did not recognize. The other 2 were strangers, a man and a woman, both middle-aged, looking professional and serious. "Independent witnesses," Howard explained. "They are not related to you. They are not employees of this firm. They are citizens with no stake in this outcome. And," he pointed to the corner of the room. A tripod had been set up with a high-definition video camera. A red light blinked on the front. "We are recording the entire session," Howard said. "We are going to establish capacity. We are going to establish intent. We are going to make it so that if your brother wants to challenge this transfer, he will have to prove that not only were you a mastermind manipulator, but that I was incompetent. The notary was blind, the witnesses were bribed, and the video camera was hallucinating." Grandpa looked at me. "Let the papers speak for you when the family screams. Ivy, when they yell, you just point to the law." The next hour was the most intense experience of my life. It wasn't an action movie scene. There were no explosions, but the tension was so high I felt lightheaded. Howard led Grandpa through a series of questions on camera. State your full name and date of birth. Do you recognize the woman sitting next to you? Do you understand the value of the assets you are transferring? Are you under any duress or coercion? Grandpa answered every question with a clarity that sliced through the room. He cracked a joke about the current price of lumber. He recited the addresses of all 11 properties from memory. He explained, in detail, why he was bypassing his daughter and his grandson. My son-in-law passed away 10 years ago, Grandpa told the camera, looking directly into the lens. My daughter, Elaine, has never balanced a checkbook in her life. My grandson, Derek, sees these houses as poker chips. He wants to cash them out. I am giving them to my granddaughter, Ivy, because she is the only one who knows the names of the people living inside them. This is not a gift of wealth. It is an assignment of stewardship. When it was my turn to sign, my hand shook. I could not help it. I felt like I was crossing a bridge that was burning behind me. I was severing myself from the role of the quiet, obedient sister. I was declaring war, even if nobody else knew it yet. I signed. The notary stamped. The witnesses signed. The scratching of the pens on paper sounded loud in the room. Scritch, scratch. The sound of a family hierarchy being rewritten. When it was done, Howard gathered the documents into a thick file. He did not hand them to me. He locked them in a fireproof safe behind his desk. I will file the deeds with the county tomorrow morning, Howard said. It will be public record, but unless Derek is actively monitoring the grantor index, he won't notice. The tax bills will be redirected to a post office box I've set up for the LLC. The tenants have already received letters instructing them to make checks payable to Ironwood Holdings for administrative purposes. As far as they know, it is just a name change. Grandpa reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a sealed white envelope. It was thick, and the flap was taped shut with heavy security tape. He handed it to me. This is for the end, he said. The end, I asked, taking it. It felt heavy. Do not open this until Derek is most confident, Grandpa said. Wait until he thinks he has won. Wait until he is standing in front of everyone, claiming he owns the world. Wait until he has committed himself so fully to his own lie that he cannot back out. Then, and only then, do you open this. I put the envelope in my bag. It sat there next to my camera lens, a dormant grenade. For the next 6 months, I lived a double life. By day, I was still Ivy, the struggling photographer. I went to family dinners and listened to Mom talk about how stress-free Derek's life would be once he took over the estate. I listened to Derek brag about the new boat he was browsing online, heavily implying he would buy it with the inheritance. But in the shadows, I was the CEO of Ironwood Holdings. The rent checks came to the P.O. box. I collected them. I deposited them into the new business account. And then, I went to work. I used the money to do the things Derek had refused to do. I replaced the rotted back steps at the house on Maple Street. I approved the new furnace for the duplex. I paid Miller the roofer to finally fix the flashing on the commercial building. I had to be careful. I couldn't let the tenants mention my name to Derek. I told them that I was just acting as the field manager for the new holding company. They didn't care who signed the checks as long as the heat worked. It was satisfying. But it was also terrifying. I was spending money that Derek believed was accumulating in Grandpa's accounts for him. He thought there was a pot of gold growing at the end of the rainbow. He didn't realize I was spending the gold to fix the rainbow. Derek, meanwhile, began to play the part of the martyr manager. At Sunday lunch, he would sigh dramatically and rub his temples. I had to go out to the properties again this week. He would lie. Fixed a leak myself. Cost me $300 in parts. I'm keeping all the receipts. Of course, I will reimburse myself when the estate settles. I sat there, eating my salad, biting my tongue until it hurt. I knew he hadn't been there. I had been there. I had paid the plumber $250 from the Ironwood account. There were no parts. There was no leak that Derek fixed. He was manufacturing expenses. He was building a claim. He wanted to show that he had invested his own capital so he could demand a larger share of the estate later. You are such a good son, Mom would coo, patting his hand. Always sacrificing for the family. It is just business, Mom, Derek would say, looking humble. Someone has to do the dirty work. It made me sick, but I stayed silent. I remembered Grandpa's advice. Wait until he is most confident. Then came the slip-up, the crack in his armor. It happened 2 weeks before Grandpa passed away. I was at my parents' house, helping Mom set up her new iPad. Derek had been there earlier in the day to go over finances with Mom, which mostly involved him drinking her wine and complaining about his own business overhead. He had left his email logged in on the browser of the family computer in the den. I walked past the screen and saw a subject line that made me stop. Ree Bennett Portfolio Acquisition. Preliminary Offer. I shouldn't have looked. It was an invasion of privacy. But I was not just a sister anymore. I was the owner of Ironwood Holdings, and I was protecting my assets. I clicked the email. It was a thread between Derek and a man named Stephen Vance from Apex Property Management. Apex was a notorious company in the state. They were known for buying up family-owned rentals, evicting long-term tenants, doing cosmetic renovations, gray laminate floors, cheap stainless steel appliances, and doubling the rent. They were the vultures of the real estate world. I read Derek's reply. Dated 2 days prior. Steve, look, the old man is on his last legs. It is a matter of weeks. Once the title clears to me, I am ready to hand over the entire portfolio. I do not want to deal with the day-to-day management. I want a clean break. If you can guarantee the referral fee we discussed, the 6% on the sale price, plus the kickback on the management contract, I will sign exclusivity with you the day after the funeral. My stomach turned over. He wasn't going to manage them. He wasn't going to optimize them. He was going to sell them. He was going to sell Mrs. Vega's home. He was going to sell Mr. Yej Henderson's shop. He was going to take the check, take his 6% side deal, and walk away, leaving the people Grandpa loved to be devoured by a corporation. And he was lying to everyone. He was telling Mom he was going to build a legacy, while he was secretly negotiating to sell it for parts. I took my phone out. I took a photo of the screen. Then I logged him out. I walked out of that room with my heart pounding like a hammer against my ribs. The fear was gone. The guilt was gone. All that was left was a cold, hard resolve. Grandpa had been right. Derek was not just greedy. He was a traitor to the very name he was so proud of. I drove to the hospital that night. Grandpa was sleeping, his breathing shallow and rattling. I sat by his bed and held his hand. I saw it, I whispered to him, even though I wasn't sure he could hear me. I saw the email. You were right. He didn't wake up, but his fingers twitched in mine. I looked at the bag where I kept the sealed envelope. I understood now. The envelope wasn't just a legal document. It was the final piece of the trap. Grandpa knew Derek would try to sell. He knew Derek would try to cheat. The papers in the safe at Howard's office were the shield. The envelope was the sword. And as I sat there in the dark, listening to the hum of the machines, I knew that when the time came, I would not hesitate to swing it. The end came at 4 a.m. on a Tuesday. It was not dramatic. There were no final speeches or sudden gasps for air. The machinery simply stopped. The rhythmic hiss of the oxygen concentrator, which had been the soundtrack of my life for 4 years, cut out, leaving a silence so sudden and profound that it felt like a pressure drop in an airplane cabin. I was the only one in the room. I had been holding Grandpa Walter's hand, counting the space between his breaths, knowing that the intervals were getting longer, when the last breath left him and did not return. I did not call the nurse immediately. I did not call my mother. I sat there for 10 minutes in the quiet, just him and me, honoring the man who had taught me that a house was a promise. I squeezed his hand one last time, thanked him for the lessons, and then I walked out into the hallway to tell the world that the patriarch was gone. The reaction of my family was immediate and chaotic, but not in the way grief usually manifests. It was the chaos of a corporate merger. My mother arrived within 20 minutes, hair perfectly done despite the hour, wearing a tracksuit that looked expensive enough to be formal wear. She cried, of course, She threw herself onto the chair by the bed and sobbed loudly, calling out for her daddy. But even as she wept, I saw her eyes darting around the room, cataloging the items on the dresser, checking to see if his watch was still on the bedside table. She was grieving, yes, but she was also taking inventory. Derek did not come to the hospital. When I called him, he paused for a beat, a silence I now recognize as a calculation, and then said he would handle the arrangements. He said he had to start making calls. He did not ask if Grandpa had been in pain. He did not ask if I was okay. He said he had to contact the funeral home because he knew the director and could get us the family package. For the next 3 days, I was a ghost in my own family. While they sat in the living room discussing catering options and arguing over whether to serve salmon or chicken at the wake, I was in the back room, quietly packing away Grandpa's clothes. I folded his cardigans, the ones that smelled like tobacco and peppermint. I boxed up his books. I was mourning a person. They were planning an event. The funeral was a masterpiece of performance art. The church was full. Grandpa had been a fixture in Hollowcrest for 50 years, and the pews were packed with tenants, contractors, and local business owners. I sat in the front row, wedged between my mother and the aisle. Derek sat on the other side of Mom, checking his phone discreetly every 3 minutes until the service started. When it was time for the eulogy, Derek stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket with a sharp, decisive snap. He walked to the pulpit not like a grieving grandson, but like a keynote speaker at a shareholder meeting. He cleared his throat and looked out over the crowd. He did not look at the coffin. Walter Bennett was a giant, Derek began, his voice booming with a practiced resonance. He was a man who understood value. He came to this town with nothing and built an empire of brick and mortar. He had a vision. He knew that to build a legacy, you have to be tough, you have to be smart, you have to know when to hold and when to fold. I stared at my hands. Grandpa had never played poker in his life. He didn't know how to fold. He knew how to fix. Derek continued, his hands gripping the sides of the lectern. Grandpa taught me so much about business. He taught me that land is the only thing that lasts. He taught me that stewardship is about growth. And as we say goodbye to him today, I want to promise him and all of you that the foundation he poured will not crack. I will ensure that the Bennett legacy continues to expand, to grow, and to dominate the market in Hollowcrest. A ripple of polite applause went through the room. People were nodding. They bought it. They saw the suit, the confidence, the strong jawline, and they thought, yes, here is the heir. They didn't see that he was talking about a portfolio, not a person. He hadn't mentioned kindness. He hadn't mentioned the time Grandpa forgave 3 months of rent for the widow on 4th Street. He had turned Grandpa's life into a resume for his own job application. After the service, at the reception held in the church hall, the mask slipped even further. I was standing near the coffee urn, trying to avoid conversation, when Aunt Loretta cornered me. Loretta was my mother's younger sister, a woman who viewed life as a series of transactions where she had been shortchanged. It was a lovely service, Ivy, she said, picking up a cookie and inspecting it critically. Derek spoke so well. He really steps up, doesn't he? He has a loud voice, I said neutrally. Loretta leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. So, have they talked to you yet? About the distribution? I took a sip of my lukewarm coffee. Grandpa has been dead for 48 hours, Aunt Loretta. I know, she said, waving her hand dismissively. But these things take time to process. Probate can take months, and I was just thinking, things have been tight for your uncle and me. The transmission on the van is going, and since you were so close to Walter, maybe you could put in a good word with Derek when he starts cutting the checks. She looked at me with hungry eyes. To her, the estate wasn't a collection of homes where people lived, it was a pie, and she was terrified that Derek was going to eat the whole thing before she got a crumb. I do not have any influence over Derek, I said, stepping back. Oh, come on, she said, her tone sharpening. You lived in his pocket for 4 years. Surely he gave you something, cash, jewelry, Don't hold out on family. Ivy? I walked away. I couldn't stomach it. I went outside and stood in the parking lot, breathing in the cold air, waiting for the performance to end. 3 days later, the summons came. It wasn't a request. It was an email from Derek, CCing Mom, Aunt Loretta, and Tiffany. Subject: Estate Strategy Meeting Location, Klein and Marrow Legal Group. Time, Friday, 10:00 a.m. Please attend to discuss the transition of assets and the future management structure of the Bennett estate. Attendance is mandatory, as if he were already my boss. That night, my phone buzzed with a text message from him. Ivy, Friday is going to be heavy on legal details. I know that stuff bores you. Just sit tight. I have worked out a plan. I am going to set aside a cash sum for you from the operating account so you can take some time off. Maybe travel. Don't make it awkward in front of Klein. Let me handle the heavy lifting. I stared at the screen. He was trying to bribe me. He thought that if he threw a few $1,000s at me, I would nod along while he dismantled everything Grandpa built. He thought I was weak. He thought I was just the little sister who took pictures of flowers and didn't understand how the real world worked. He had no idea that I was currently sitting on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by 4 years of evidence. I had organized everything. The receipts for the roof repairs were in a blue folder. The emails from the tenants were printed and chronologically sorted. The bank statements from the Ironwood Holdings account, the account he didn't know existed, were highlighted. And next to them lay the sealed envelope Grandpa had given me. I hadn't opened it yet. I wanted to. The temptation to rip it open and see the final instructions was overwhelming, but I honored the command. Wait until he is most confident. I picked up my phone and saw a message from Howard Klein. It was short, professional, and cryptic. I have received Derek's agenda for the meeting. He intends to speak for the first hour. Let him. Do not interrupt until he asks for signatures. Let them speak first. I trusted Howard. He was the only other person who knew where the landmines were buried. I was about to go to sleep when my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a text. It was an automated alert from the credit monitoring service I had signed up for on behalf of the estate, another little administrative task Grandpa had asked me to handle years ago to watch for identity theft. Alert: credit inquiry detected. Applicant Derek Bennett, collateral, listed 412 Maple Street, 880 Elm Street, 105 Main Commercial, Institution State Valley Bank. I sat up straight, my heart hammering against my ribs. The timestamp was from 2 hours ago. Derek wasn't just planning to take over the properties. He was already spending them. He had applied for a loan, probably a massive business line of credit, using the properties as collateral. He had listed assets he did not own to secure debt for himself. He was gambling with houses that belonged to Ironwood Holdings. He was committing bank fraud. He must have assumed that since he was the presumed heir, the bank would overlook the title issues until probate cleared. Or maybe he had forged a document saying he had power of attorney. Either way, he had crossed a line that you can't walk back from. I took a screenshot of the alert. I printed it out. I added it to the folder. I looked at the text message from him again. Don't make it awkward. I almost laughed. It was a cold, humorless sound in the empty apartment. He was worried about things being awkward. He should have been worried about things being criminal. I turned off the light, but I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, visualizing the conference room. I pictured Derek standing there, confident, arrogant, thinking he was the smartest person in the room. I pictured my mother nodding, Tiffany smiling, Aunt Loretta calculating her cut. They thought they were walking into a coronation. They didn't know they were walking into an arraignment. The grief was still there. A dull ache in the center of my chest. I missed Grandpa. I missed his rasping voice and his stories about the war. But the grief was being hardened by something else. It was being calcified by anger. They had ignored him when he was alive. They had reduced his suffering to an inconvenience. And now, they were trying to erase his wishes before the dirt on his grave had even settled. I closed my eyes and whispered into the dark. I am ready. Grandpa. The stage was set, the actors were in place, and I was holding the script that was going to ruin the show. The week leading up to the estate meeting was a masterclass in psychological warfare. My brother did not use guns or fists. He used bandwidth and notifications. He waged a campaign of inevitable victory, designed to make me feel like a minor obstacle that was about to be paved over by the steamroller of his ambition. It started on Monday morning with a notification on my phone. I was drinking black coffee, staring at the rain streaking the window of my small apartment, when Instagram alerted me that Derek had posted a new photo. I clicked on it. It was a picture of him standing in an empty high-rise office space downtown. The floor-to-ceiling windows behind him showed the hollow crest skyline. He was wearing his navy suit, arms crossed, looking out at the city like Batman. If Batman were a middle manager with a receding hairline. The caption read, "Big things coming. Expanding the footprint, taking the family legacy to the next level. CEO, real estate, empire grind never stops." He had not leased that office. I knew for a fact he could not afford the rent on a space like that. Not yet. He was just touring it. But the narrative he was spinning was clear. The deal was done. He was already measuring the drapes for a kingdom he did not own. The comments section was filled with congratulations from his golf buddies and distant cousins who were hoping to be invited to the launch party. Way to go. Derek, a true leader. Your grandfather would be proud. I almost threw my phone across the room. They had no idea. They did not know that the legacy he was hashtagging was currently sitting in a fireproof safe under the name Ironwood Holdings. Then the phone call started. Tiffany was the first wave. She called me on Tuesday afternoon while I was editing a batch of photos for a jewelry catalog. Her ringtone, usually annoying, sounded like a siren. "Hey, Ivy." Her voice was bright, sugary, and entirely fake. "I am just calling to check on you. We know this week is going to be so emotional for you." "I am fine, Tiffany," I said, keeping my hand steady on the mouse. "Good, good," she said. I could hear the sound of her nails tapping against something hard, probably a glass of wine. "Derek is just so worried about you. He feels bad that you have to sit through all this legal boring stuff on Friday. He was saying last night that he really wants to make sure you are protected." "Protected from what?" I asked. "Oh, you know," she laughed, a tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "The stress. Property management is a nightmare. Sweetie, tenants calling at all hours, pipes bursting, insurance claims. It is not for creative people like you. You need your headspace for your art. Your photography is so cute." She paused, waiting for me to agree that my career was a hobby. When I didn't speak, she pivoted. "Look, the point is, Derek is ready to handle all the ugly stuff. You just need to sign the management transfer, and he is going to set you up with a nice monthly allowance. You could finally buy that new camera you wanted, or maybe go to Europe. Did you not always want to go to Paris?" It was a bribe wrapped in an insult. She was offering me a ticket out of town so they could loot the castle in peace. "I will see you on Friday, Tiffany," I said, and hung up before she could offer me a Disneyland pass. Wednesday brought the heavy artillery. My mother. She did not call to bribe me. She called to guilt me. "Ivy," she said, her voice trembling, "I have not slept in 3 days." "Why not, Mom?" "Because I am worried about this family falling apart." She sobbed. "Your father is gone. Your grandfather is gone. All we have is each other. And I feel this tension. Ivy, I feel you pulling away." "I am not pulling away," I said, rubbing my temples. "I am just waiting for the meeting." "You have to listen to your brother," she said, her tone hardening instantly. "He is the man of the house now. He knows what he is doing. He has a degree, Ivy. He has experience. Please, for my sake, do not be difficult on Friday. Just agree to his plan. He says he has a distribution strategy that is fair for everyone." "Fair?" I asked. "Have you seen it?" "I trust him," she snapped. "And you should too. Do not let your pride ruin his future. He has worked so hard for this." I hung up feeling hollow. My pride. She thought my resistance was about pride. She could not conceive that her golden son was a predator, and her failure of a daughter was the protector. On Thursday morning, the day before the meeting, I found the smoking gun. Derek, in his infinite arrogance, had made a sloppy mistake. He had created a shared Dropbox folder titled Estate Docs and invited the whole family to view it, presumably to show off how organized he was. Most of the files were generic PDFs about probate law, but there was one document in a subfolder that was marked Draft, Internal Use Only. I clicked it. It was titled Proposed Asset Distribution and Management Agreement. I read it, and my blood turned to ice. It was not a distribution plan. It was a robbery. According to the document, Derek was appointing himself as the executive trustee with a management fee of 15% of the gross revenue, not the net. The gross. That meant he would take his cut before a single repair bill was paid. For Mom, there was a living stipend that was capped at a fixed amount, barely enough to cover her country club dues and groceries. And for me, I scrolled down to the section labeled Ivy Harrison. Beneficiary shall receive a discretionary quarterly payment, not to exceed 2% of net proceeds, contingent upon the beneficiary demonstrating financial responsibility and refraining from any interference in the operational management of the assets. Contingent, discretionary. He wasn't just cutting me out. He was putting me on a leash. He wanted the power to cut off my money if I asked too many questions, or if I didn't demonstrate responsibility, which in his language meant doing exactly what Derek says. He had also included a clause that allowed the executive trustee to liquidate assets without consensus if market conditions necessitated capital fluidity. That was the kill switch. That was the clause that would let him sell Mrs. Vega's house to Apex Property Management next week and pocket the commission. I saved a copy of the document to my hard drive. Then I printed it. I was shaking with rage, but the real blow came that afternoon. I decided to drive past the properties one last time, just to make sure everything was standing before the storm. I drove down Elm Street. It was a gray, overcast day. When I pulled up to Mrs. Vega's house, I saw her sitting on the front porch steps. She was crying. I parked the car and ran up the walk. Marisol. What is wrong? Is it your mother? She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. She was clutching a piece of paper in her hand. It is over, Ivy, she whispered. I have to leave. I cannot afford it. What are you talking about? I asked, sitting down next to her on the cold concrete. I got a text message, she said, and this letter was in the mailbox today. She handed me the paper. It was on cheap copy paper. No letterhead. Just bold black text. Notice of rent review and lease termination to the occupant. Please be advised that under new ownership management, the property at 880 Elm Street is undergoing a market value assessment. Preliminary evaluation suggests the current rental agreement is 40% below market standard. You are hereby notified that effective the 1st of next month, the monthly rent will be adjusted to $1,800. If you are unable to meet this obligation, consider this your 30-day notice to vacate the premises to allow for renovation. Signed, DB Asset Management. I stared at the paper. $1,800. She was currently paying $1,100. It was an illegal increase. In our state, you had to give 60 days notice for a hike that size, and you certainly couldn't threaten eviction in the same breath. And look, Mrs. Vega said, pulling out her phone. She showed me a text message from a number I recognized immediately. It was Derek's secondary work cell phone. Marisol. This is Derek Bennett. I know you and Ivy are friendly, but please understand that she has no authority over the estate anymore. Do not ask her for help. If you cannot pay the new rate, I can offer you $500 cash to move out by the weekend. It is a generous offer. Take it. He was trying to bribe her to leave so he could sell the house empty. An empty house sells faster than one with a low-income tenant. I do not have anywhere to go, Mrs. Vega sobbed. Mom is so sick. I cannot move her. I put my arm around her. The rage I had felt earlier was gone, replaced by a cold, deadly clarity. Marisol, I said, my voice low and steady. Look at me. She looked up, sniffing. Do not pack a single box, I said. Do not reply to that text. "Do not look for a new apartment." "But he said—" "I know what he said," I interrupted. "But he is lying. He does not own this house. He does not have the authority to evict you. And he certainly does not have the power to raise your rent by $700 on a whim." "But he is the grandson," she said fearfully. "He is the businessman." "He is a fraud," I said. "And tomorrow morning, everyone is going to know it." I stood up. "Keep that letter. Give it to me. I need it for the meeting." She handed it to me. "Are you sure?" "Ivy, I am scared." "I promise you," I said. "On Grandpa's grave. You are safe. The rent stays the same. The roof stays over your head. Trust me one last time." I left her sitting on the porch, clutching her shawl, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. I sat in my car and called Howard Klein. He sent eviction threats. I told him the moment he picked up, to the tenants, before he even has the deed. I am looking at the draft lease he sent over to the bank. Howard's voice was dry as dust. "It is a disaster, Ivy. He downloaded a template from a website. It references California civil codes. We are in Ohio. If he tried to enforce this in a local court, the judge would laugh him out of the room before fining him for harassment. He is dangerous." "Howard," I said. "He is terrorizing them." "He is desperate," Howard corrected. "He is over-leveraged. I did some digging. Derek's consulting firm is not doing well. He lost his 2 biggest clients last month. He needs this estate not just for the wealth, but to cover his own debts. He is drowning, and he thinks these houses are life rafts. He is going to try and sink us all," I said. "Bring the letter," Howard said. "Bring the text messages, and bring the envelope." "I have it," I said. I went home. I laid my clothes out on the bed for the next morning. I chose a black blazer, sharp and tailored. I chose a white shirt, crisp and clean. It was armor. I picked up the sealed envelope Grandpa had given me. It was sitting on my dresser. I ran my thumb over the wax seal on the back. "Do not open until he is confident." Derek was confident. He was posting on Instagram. He was drafting distribution agreements that cut me out. He was threatening widows with eviction. He was soaring high on the thermal currents of his own ego. I put the envelope in my leather bag. I checked the file folder one last time. Section 1, the deeds. Ironwood Holdings. Section 2, the repairs. The evidence of stewardship. Section 3, the fraud. The bank alerts and the fake eviction notices. Section 4, the kill shot. Grandpa's letter. I stood in front of the mirror. I looked tired. My eyes were shadowed. But I didn't look like the little sister anymore. I didn't look like the dreamer. I looked like the landlord. The night passed slowly. The silence in my apartment was heavy, charged with the electricity of the coming storm. I didn't sleep. I just watched the clock tick down. 7 a.m., 8 a.m., 9 a.m. I grabbed my bag. It was heavy on my shoulder. I drove to the law firm. The sky was still gray, fitting for an execution. When I walked into the building, the receptionist nodded at me. She looked nervous. She knew something was coming. I took the elevator up to the 3rd floor. The doors slid open with a soft chime. I walked down the hallway toward the conference room. I could hear voices inside. I heard Derek's laugh. It was loud, booming, the laugh of a man who has already spent the money. I stopped at the door. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the stale, conditioned air. I wasn't scared. Fear is for people who don't know the outcome. I knew exactly what was going to happen. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The trap was set. All that was left was for the mouse to snap the cheese. The projector fan was humming. It was a low, irritating drone that seemed to vibrate against the wood paneling of the conference room. Derek had set up his own equipment. He had not used the law firm's technology. He had brought a portable projector and a screen that he had positioned in front of the window, blocking out the gray light of the city. He wanted to control the illumination. He wanted to be the only source of light in the room. I sat in my chair by the door, watching the dust motes dance in the beam of the projector. The room was full. My mother was there. dabbing her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Tiffany was scrolling on her phone under the table, her thumb moving with manic speed. Aunt Loretta and Uncle Bob were there, looking uncomfortable in their funeral suits, their eyes darting toward the refreshments table where a plate of untouched bagels sat. Howard Klein sat at the head of the table, or at least, where the head of the table used to be before Derek usurped it. Howard looked small in his chair. He had his hands folded over a file, and his face was an unreadable mask of professional patience. Derek did not wait for Howard to open the meeting. He did not wait for a roll call. He simply buttoned his jacket, clicked a small remote in his hand, and the screen behind him flooded with blue light. "Thank you all for coming," Derek said. His voice was smooth, polished, the voice of a man who had rehearsed this speech in front of a mirror for a week. "I know the last few days have been incredibly difficult. Grandpa Walter was the bedrock of this family. Losing him has left a void." He clicked the remote. A photo of Grandpa appeared on the screen. It was an old photo, taken 20 years ago, back when Grandpa was strong and standing in front of his first apartment building. It was a manipulative choice. He was invoking the image of the builder to justify the demolition he was about to propose. "But a void cannot remain empty," Derek continued, pacing slightly. "Nature abhors a vacuum, and business abhors uncertainty. Grandpa was a visionary, but let us be honest with ourselves. In his later years, his management style became relaxed. He operated on handshakes and notebook paper. In the modern market, that is a liability." My mother nodded solemnly. "He was so tired at the end," she whispered, loud enough for the room to hear. "Exactly, Mom," Derek said, gesturing to her with open palms. "He was tired. And because he was tired, he did not leave us with a clear, modernized roadmap. The will is old. It dates back to before Dad died. It is vague on the specifics of the asset allocation. This was the first lie. The will wasn't vague. It was standard. But Derek needed it to be vague so he could offer a solution. He clicked the remote again. A pie chart appeared. It was titled Proposed Legacy Restructuring Strategy. "Since there is no specific designation for the management of the portfolio," Derek lied, looking straight at Howard Klein, "I have taken the liberty of consulting with my own financial advisors. We have drafted a plan that ensures stability for everyone. We call it the Bennett Family Trust Model." He used the word trust like a weapon. "Here is the reality," Derek said, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "These properties are old. They require massive capital infusion for maintenance. They are a burden. If we split them up, give a house to Ivy, a house to Mom, a house to Loretta, we lose leverage, we lose buying power. The taxes alone would eat you alive." He looked at Aunt Loretta. She shrank back, looking terrified of the imaginary taxes. "So," Derek said, smiling benevolently, "I am stepping up. I am proposing that I take full legal ownership and operational control of the entire portfolio. I will absorb the risk. I will take on the debt for the repairs. I will handle the 3A sum M phone calls about leaking toilets." He paused for effect. "In exchange, the family will receive a guaranteed annual stipend, passive income. You do not do a thing. You just cash the check." He clicked to the next slide. It showed a series of numbers. "Mom," he said, turning to her, "you get the primary share, $40,000 a year, tax-free from the estate revenue, to maintain your lifestyle. No worries about property tax, no worries about insurance." Mom let out a breath she seemed to have been holding since the funeral. "Oh, Derek, that is wonderful. That is so generous." "Loretta?" Derek nodded to her. $5,000 a year, just for being family." Loretta's eyes widened. $5,000 was not a lot of money in the grand scheme, but for doing nothing, it sounded like a lottery win. She smiled nervously. "Well, that is very kind of you, Derek." "And Ivy," Derek said. He did not turn to me. He kept his eyes on the screen. The slide changed. My name appeared at the bottom, in smaller text. "Ivy Harrison conditional stipend." "Ivy," he said. his voice taking on a tone of brotherly concern that made my skin crawl. We know you have struggled to find your footing financially. The freelance life is unpredictable. I do not want you to worry about rent. So, I have allocated a stipend of $2,000 a year for you. $2,000. It was an insult. It was less than what Mrs. Vega paid in 2 months of rent. However, Derek added quickly, raising a finger, because this is a business, and we need to be responsible. This stipend is conditional. It requires that you sign a non-interference agreement. It means you let the professionals handle the business. You stick to your photography. You do not harass the tenants. You do not confuse them with conflicting instructions. You just live your life. He turned to me then, flashing a bright, plastic smile. It is a safety net. Ivy, I am giving you freedom. The room was silent for a heartbeat. Then, Tiffany started to clap. It was a slow, sharp applause. Clap, clap, clap. This is amazing, honey, she said, beaming at him. You are taking on so much for everyone. You are literally saving this family. My mother joined in, clapping softly, tears in her eyes. Thank you, Derek. Thank you for being the strong one. Even Aunt Loretta clapped, her eyes already spending the $5,000. The sound of their applause filled the room. It was the sound of people selling their birthright for a promise that would bounce. I sat perfectly still. I did not clap. I did not frown. I just watched him. I watched the way he soaked up the adulation. I watched the way his chest puffed out. He really believed it. He believed that if he made a PowerPoint presentation and wore a suit, reality would bend to his will. Howard Klein cleared his throat. It was a dry, raspy sound, but it cut through the applause. Mr. Bennett? Howard said. He did not stand up. He didn't have to. Derek held up a hand, silencing him. One moment. Howard, I want to make sure everyone understands the vision before we get into the legal weeds. Mr. Bennett, Howard said again, his voice a little louder. I really must insist that we review the actual... I said one moment, Derek snapped. The mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing the bully underneath. He turned back to the family, composing his face into an expression of long-suffering patience. Lawyers, he joked lightly, always in a rush to bill the hour, right? Tiffany giggled. My mother smiled weakly. Derek walked to the head of the table, standing right next to where Howard was sitting. He leaned his hands on the mahogany surface, looming over the attorney. It was a power move. He was physically demonstrating who was in charge. The bottom line is this, Derek said, addressing the room. Grandpa built this, but Grandpa is gone. Someone has to carry the torch. Someone has to be the owner. And looking around this room, I am the only one who can do it. He looked at me. His eyes were cold, devoid of any sibling affection. They were the eyes of a shark looking at a seal. So, let us be clear, Derek said. Everything is mine. The titles, the accounts, the decisions, whatever paperwork Howard has there, we can sign it. But the reality is already set. I am the owner. I am the CEO, and I will take care of you all, provided you let me lead. Everything is mine. The words hung in the air. He had said it. He had finally said the quiet part out loud. He had claimed total dominion. I looked at Howard. Howard looked at me. His expression did not change, but his eyes shifted slightly. It was a signal. The trap was sprung. The prey had walked in, eaten the bait, and was now announcing that he owned the mousetrap. I uncrossed my legs. I placed my hands on the table. Derek, I said. My voice was not loud, but in the acoustic stillness of the room, it carried. Derek sighed. He looked at the ceiling, as if asking God for patience with his difficult sister. Yes. Ivy. Do you have a question about the stipend? We can discuss the payment schedule later. I do not have a question about the stipend, I said. I have a question about your definition. My definition of what? He asked, checking his watch. Everything, I said. I stood up. My legs felt steady. My heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm, like a war drum. You just said, "Everything is mine," I continued, keeping my eyes locked on his face. You said you are the owner. You said the reality is already set. It is, Derek said, sounding bored. I have already spoken to the bank. I have already spoken to the management companies. It is a done deal, Ivy. Do not embarrass yourself by fighting it. I am not fighting, I said. I am clarifying. I picked up the manila folder that had been sitting in front of me. I held it in my hand, feeling the weight of the paper inside. Are you sure, Derek? I asked. Are you absolutely sure you know what everything is? Derek laughed. It was a cruel, dismissive sound. Oh, here we go. Ivy and her metaphors. Ivy and her feelings. You are always so emotional. Ivy, this is business. Facts do not care about your feelings. You are right, I said. Facts do not care about feelings. I looked at my mother. She was staring at me with a mixture of annoyance and pity. She wanted me to sit down. She wanted the nice meeting to continue. She wanted the check. Mom, I said, you told me to be practical. You told me to be like Derek. Ivy, please, Mom hissed. Sit down. I am being practical, I said. Practicality means checking the paperwork. I turned back to Derek. He was smirking. He thought I was throwing a tantrum. He thought I was begging for a bigger slice of the pie. You mentioned the titles, I said. You mentioned the deeds. You mentioned that Grandpa didn't designate anyone. Because he didn't, Derek said. He died owning everything. That means it goes to probate. That means I, as the executor, decide. Actually, I said, that is where you are wrong. I looked at Howard Klein. Mr. Klein, I said, I think my brother is confused about the inventory of the estate. Perhaps you could help him. Derek rolled his eyes. Howard, tell her to sit down so we can sign the papers. Howard Klein did not tell me to sit down. He did not look at Derek. He opened the thick file he had been guarding. He adjusted his glasses. He pulled out a stack of documents that bore the official, raised seal of the county clerk's office. Mr. Bennett, Howard said, his voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. I tried to interrupt you earlier to prevent you from making false statements recorded by the minutes of this meeting, but you insisted on finishing. Derek's smile faltered. False statements. What are you talking about? You stated that Walter Bennett died owning the properties in the portfolio. Howard said, that is factually incorrect. What? Derek blinked. Of course he owned them. I have the tax records from last year. Last year is not today, Howard said. Howard slid the first document across the table. It spun on the polished wood and came to a stop right in front of Derek. The property at 880 Elm Street, Howard recited from memory, along with the other 8 residential units and the 2 commercial entities, were transferred out of Walter Bennett's name 4 months ago. The room went deadly silent. The hum of the projector seemed to get louder. Transferred, Derek whispered. Transferred to who? Howard looked at me. He didn't smile, but there was a glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. They were transferred to a limited liability company, Howard said. Ironwood Holdings. Ironwood Holdings. Derek looked around, confused. What is that? Did Grandpa sell them? Who owns Ironwood Holdings? I stepped forward. I walked past my mother. I walked past Tiffany, whose mouth was hanging slightly open. I walked until I was standing right next to the screen where Derek's pie chart was still glowing. I do, I said. Derek turned to me. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Ironwood Holdings is a single-member LLC, I said, my voice steady and cold. I am the sole member, I am the owner, and I have been the owner for 4 months. I reached into my bag and pulled out the sealed envelope, the one Grandpa had given me. I placed it on the table next to Howard's file. You wanted to take everything, Derek, I said. But there is nothing left to take. You are fighting over a ghost. That is impossible, Derek stammered. his face turning a blotchy red. Grandpa wouldn't, he couldn't, he was sick. You manipulated him. We will get to that, I said. But first, I think you should turn off the projector. The show is over. The silence that followed my declaration was absolute. It was not the quiet of a library or a church. It was the vacuum of a blown airlock. The oxygen had been sucked out of the room, leaving everyone gasping, staring at the small woman in the corner who had just claimed the empire. Howard Klein did not give them time to breathe. He moved with the ruthless efficiency of a machine. He opened the file in front of him, the real file, and began sliding documents across the polished mahogany table. Swish, swish, swish. Deed of transfer for 880 Elm Street, Howard announced, his voice flat. Recorded November 12th. Deed of transfer for 412 Maple Street, recorded November 12th. Deed of transfer for the commercial entity known as the Henderson Block, recorded November 12th. He looked up, his glasses catching the glare of the overhead lights. All properties were legally conveyed from Walter Bennett to Ironwood Holdings, LLC. The transaction was finalized, notarized, and filed with the county clerk 4 months prior to Mr. Bennett's passing. The estate of Walter Bennett, which you are here to divide, currently holds 0 real estate assets. It consists solely of personal effects and a checking account with a balance of approximately $12,000. 12,000! Aunt Loretta shrieked. She stood up so fast her chair tipped over backward, hitting the floor with a deafening crash. That is it. That is all there is. My mother, Elaine, went pale. It wasn't a gradual paling. The blood simply vanished from her face. She looked at me, her eyes wide and terrifyingly empty. Ivy, what have you done? You stole it. You stole the family's future. I preserved the family's honor, I said, my voice shaking slightly but holding firm. Then, the explosion happened. Derek did not scream at first. He stood frozen, staring at the deeds scattered on the table like bad tarot cards. He picked one up. His hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled. He read the lines. He saw the stamp. He saw Grandpa's signature shaky, weak, but undeniably his. Then he looked at me, and his face twisted into something ugly. "This is fraud," he whispered. Then he roared, slamming his fist onto the table. "This is fraud. She manipulated him. Look at the date, November. He was sick. He was on morphine. He didn't know what he was doing." He turned to the room, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She took advantage of a dying man. She was there every day, whispering in his ear, poisoning him against us. This is undue influence. It is a textbook case. It is criminal," Tiffany shouted, jumping to her feet. "Call the police. Derek. She tricked him into signing over millions of dollars." The room descended into chaos. Uncle Bob was shouting something about lawyers. Aunt Loretta was crying, not for Grandpa, but for her lost $5,000. My mother was just staring at the table, muttering, "My daddy wouldn't do this. My daddy loved Derek." "Sit down." Howard Klein's voice was like a thunderclap. It was loud enough to rattle the water glasses. The room quieted, but the energy was still vibrating, violent and sharp. "Mr. Bennett," Howard said, turning his cold gaze to Derek. "I anticipated this reaction. Which is why I did not rely solely on a signature." Howard reached into the box beside his chair. He pulled out a thick medical file and a USB drive. "This," Howard said, tapping the file, "is a certificate of capacity signed by Dr. Eris Thorne, your grandfather's neurologist, dated the morning of the signing. It states unequivocally that Walter Bennett was fully lucid, oriented to time and place, and aware of the value of his assets. He was not on any mind-altering pain medication for 24 hours prior to the meeting." Derek opened his mouth, but Howard cut him off. "And this," Howard held up the USB drive, "is the video recording of the entire session. It is 45 minutes long. In it, your grandfather explains exactly why he is doing this. He names you, Derek. He names you specifically. He explains that he is transferring the assets to Ivy Because he believes you would liquidate them to cover your own business debts. Derek flinched as if he had been slapped. The accusation hit home. He knew it was true. "It does not matter," Derek shouted, desperate now. Sweat was beading on his forehead. People change their minds. That was 4 months ago. He regretted it. He told me he regretted it. Derek fumbled with his own briefcase. He ripped the zipper open, tearing the leather. He frantically dug through papers, throwing slide printouts and spreadsheets onto the floor until he found what he was looking for. He pulled out a single, crumpled envelope. "Here," Derek yelled, waving a piece of paper in the air. "I didn't want to bring this out because I wanted to keep things friendly. I wanted to do this the easy way. But you forced my hand. Ivy." He threw the paper onto the table. It slid toward Howard. "That is a power of attorney and a management directive," Derek declared, his chest heaving. "Signed by Grandpa 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks before he died. It grants me full retroactive authority to manage all assets and revokes all prior arrangements. It supersedes your little shell company." The room gasped. Tiffany smirked, crossing her arms triumphantly. "There. See, Derek was just being modest. He had the authority all along." My mother looked up, hope flooding back into her eyes. "Is it true? Derek, did he sign it?" "He did," Derek lied. He looked straight at me, his eyes wild. "He told me he made a mistake with you. Ivy, he said you were too soft. He signed this to fix it." Howard Klein picked up the paper. He didn't look at it immediately. He looked at me. I stood up and walked to the table. I looked down at the document Derek had produced. It was impressive at first glance. It had a legal letterhead. It had bold text. And at the bottom, it had a signature that looked like Walter Bennett. But as I looked closer, the adrenaline in my veins turned to ice. "This is fake," I said. "You are a liar," Tiffany shrieked. "You just can't accept that you lost. It is fake," I repeated, louder this time. I pointed to the paper. "Look at the date, January 15th. "So what?" Derek sneered. "He was alive on January 15th. "He was," I said. "But look at the signature. Derek, look how firm it is. The loops are closed. The line is straight." "He had a good day," Derek scoffed. "Grandpa hasn't been able to hold a pen steady since Christmas," I said. "The signature on the transfer deed from November is shaky. It is jagged. This signature. This looks like his signature from 10 years ago. It looks like you traced it from an old birthday card." "That is ridiculous speculation," Derek spat. "And there is something else," I said. I leaned in, my finger hovering over the text of the document. "The formatting. It is a standard legal template," Derek defended. "Exactly," I said. "It is a template. Paragraph 3. The landlord hereby grants authority." I looked up at my brother. Grandpa hated the word landlord. He forbade it. He never signed a document that used it. He made every lawyer change it to property owner or lessor. He said landlord sounded like a feudal lord. He would have torn this paper up before he signed it. "He was dying," Derek yelled. He didn't care about semantics. "And finally," I said, delivering the blow I had spotted instantly, "look at the bottom of the page. There are initials. W. B." I looked at my mother. "Mom, when was the last time Grandpa used his initials on a legal document?" My mother blinked, confused. "He never did. He said initials were for lazy men. He always signed his full name on every page." "Exactly," I said. "Every page of the deed transfer has Walter Thomas Bennett written out in full. It took him 20 minutes to sign the stack. This document has initials. Grandpa didn't sign this. Derek, you did." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. "How dare you?" Tiffany hissed. She stepped forward, getting in my face. "You are just trying to confuse everyone. You are the thief. You are the one who stole the houses. Family, listen to me. Ivy is trying to rob us blind. We have to stand with Derek. We have to sue her." Aunt Loretta nodded vigorously. "Yes, we have to fight this. That money belongs to the family." The cousins began to murmur, their faces turning hostile. They were a mob now. fueled by lost dollars and Tiffany's venom. They saw their free money vanishing, and they needed a villain. I was it. "Enough," Howard Klein said. He didn't shout this time. He spoke with a quiet, deadly menace. He held up Derek's document. "Mr. Bennett," Howard said, "you have submitted this document to legal counsel as a binding instrument of the estate. If this document is genuine, then Ivy's claim is void." Derek nodded, sweating profusely. "It is genuine, I swear." "Good," Howard said. "Then you won't mind if I send this immediately to the forensic document examiner I have on retainer. He can be here in 20 minutes. He will test the ink age. He will analyze the pressure of the stroke, and he will compare it to the verified signature from the video session." Howard paused. "I must warn you, Derek, forging a signature on a document involving assets over $1 million is a Class B felony. Attempting to pass it in a legal proceeding adds another charge. If the ink is wet, Derek, you are not going home today." Derek's face went gray. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at the paper, then at Howard, then at the door. He was trapping himself. If he insisted it was real, the test would jail him. If he admitted it was fake, he lost everything. The room was silent again. The cousins stopped murmuring. They looked at Derek, waiting for him to rage, to fight, to call the bluff, but he didn't. He just stood there, swaying slightly, the confident CEO dissolving into a terrified con artist. I reached into my bag. My hand brushed against the cool leather until I felt the thick paper of the sealed envelope. I pulled it out. The wax seal was unbroken. "You are guessing, Derek," I said softly. "You are guessing what Grandpa wanted. You are guessing what he would have signed. You are forging a reality because you cannot handle the truth." I placed the envelope on the table. It looked ancient compared to the crisp white paper of Derek's fake contract. "I do not need to guess," I said. "And I do not need to forge." I put my hand on the seal. "I have the one thing you never bothered to ask for," I said to the room. I have his actual final words, prepared for this exact moment, prepared for the moment you decided that greed was more important than blood. I looked at Howard. He nodded. "Shall I open it?" I asked. Howard Klein did not wait for the forensic expert. He did not need one. He looked at the document Derek had thrown on the table with the kind of scrutiny a jeweler gives a diamond he knows is glass. He adjusted his spectacles, leaned in, and then looked up at my brother with a gaze so withering it could have killed a houseplant. "You are a sloppy man, Derek," Howard said. It was not an insult. It was a factual observation. "Excuse me," Derek sputtered, wiping a line of sweat from his upper lip. "That is a legal document." "It is a legal disaster," Howard corrected. He turned the paper around so the room could see it. "Let us put aside the signature issues Ivy just pointed out. Let us look at the notarization. You have a stamp here from a notary public named Sarah Jenkins." Howard pointed a manicured finger at the bottom of the page. "The commission expiration date on this stamp is November of last year. This document is dated January 15th of this year. You used an invalid stamp, Derek. And unless Sarah Jenkins is in the habit of committing felonies to help you backdate paperwork, I suspect she was not actually present when this was signed." "I can explain that," Derek stammered. "It was an old stamp. She just hadn't bought a new one yet. A notary without a valid commission is just a person with a rubber stamp," Howard said. "And a document notarized by an invalid commission is void ab initio. From the beginning, it is worthless paper." Howard tossed the document aside. It fluttered to the mahogany surface, landing next to the real deeds of Ironwood Holdings. "But we are not done," Howard said. He opened a second folder. This one was black. "Ivy, you mentioned that your brother has been claiming to manage the estate expenses, that he has been paying out of pocket for repairs. He told Mom he spent over $5,000 last month," I said, looking at my mother. She was staring at Derek, her hands trembling in her lap. "I did." Derek shouted, his voice cracking. "I fixed the HVAC at the commercial unit. I fixed the roof leak at the duplex. I have the receipts right here. He grabbed a stack of crumpled invoices from his bag and slammed them down. There, see red brick maintenance. $4,500 for emergency boiler repair. Howard picked up the top invoice. He didn't even blink. Red brick maintenance, Howard read aloud. Address 404 Industrial Way, Suite B. He looked at Derek. Derek, did you check the corporate registry before you printed this off your home computer? It is a real company, Derek insisted. They did the work. Red Brick Maintenance filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy and was dissolved by the Secretary of State 3 years ago, Howard said coldly. Unless they are fixing boilers from the afterlife, this invoice is a fabrication. The room went quiet again, but this time, the silence was different. It wasn't shocked. It was horrified. The cousins were looking at each other. The illusion of the successful CEO was dissolving, revealing the desperate grifter underneath. I might have grabbed the wrong file, Derek said, his face draining of color. I have so many contractors. I probably just mixed up the names. Did you mix up the names when you emailed Apex Property Management? Howard asked. Derek froze. He looked like a deer in the headlights of a semi-truck. What? Howard pulled a single sheet of paper from his black folder. It was the printed email, the one I had seen, the one I had photographed, the one that proved everything. We have a communication here, Howard said, his voice rising slightly, projecting to the back of the room so Aunt Loretta wouldn't miss a word. From Derek Bennett to Stephen Vance at Apex, dated 4 days ago, Howard began to read. Steve, do not worry about the current leases. Once the title clears to me, I will evict the low-rent tenants. I am ready to hand over the entire portfolio. I want the 6% commission wired to my personal offshore account in the Caymans to avoid the estate tax implications. Just get the paperwork ready. My mother let out a sound that was half gasp, half whimper. Derek, you were going to sell them. Mom, no, it is just strategy, Derek pleaded, turning to her. I was just testing the market. I wasn't really going to do it. You were going to wire the commission to an offshore account, Uncle Bob asked, his voice thick with disbelief. You were going to cut us out completely. He wasn't just cutting you out, I said. Stepping forward, I placed my own stack of papers on the table. These, I said, pointing to my file, are the real receipts from real people, Miller Roofing, Henderson Shoe Repair, the local plumber. I opened the folder. The photos I had taken over the years spilled out photos of Miller on the roof, photos of me helping Mrs. Vega paint her porch, photos of the check signed by Ironwood Holdings clearing the bank. While Derek was printing fake invoices from dead companies to steal $5,000 from the family, I said, I was paying real money to keep the building standing. Every penny of rent that came into Ironwood Holdings went back into the property. I have the bank statements to prove it. I didn't take a dime. Derek tried to steal money he didn't even earn. He told us he was investing, Tiffany shrieked, her voice high and panicked. She was pulling away from Derek now, physically creating distance between them. He told me the money was for the lawyers. He said we had to pay fees to unlock the inheritance. Shut up, Tiffany, Derek snapped. Don't tell her to shut up, a voice came from the back of the room. It was Cousin Mike, a quiet man who worked at a car dealership. He was looking at his phone, his face pale. Derek, Mike said, holding up his phone. You told me last week that the loan was a sure thing. You said you were using the Maple Street house as collateral to get a business line of credit. You showed me the approval letter. My eyes locked with Howard's. This was it. I was just exploring financing options, Derek muttered, backing away from the table. Leverage. It is how you grow. It is how you go to prison, Howard said. Howard opened the final section of his file. He pulled out a report on bank letterhead. Ivy received an alert because she had the foresight to monitor the estate's credit, Howard said. But I have the confirmation from the fraud department at State Valley Bank. He looked at Derek with pity, mixed with disgust. You submitted a loan application for $250,000 yesterday morning. Derek, you listed 412 Maple Street and 880 Elm Street as collateral. You signed a sworn affidavit claiming you were the sole owner of those properties. Howard slammed the file shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. But you are not the owner, Howard said. Ironwood Holdings is the owner, which means you attempted to mortgage property that does not belong to you. That is not leverage, Derek. That is bank fraud. That is a federal crime. My mother finally broke. She didn't scream. She just slumped in her chair, covering her face with her hands. No, she sobbed into her palms. Not Derek. He is a good boy. He is just confused. He is not confused. Elaine, I said gently. He is a criminal. I looked at my brother. He was backed against the window now, the projector still humming behind him, casting a blue halo around his terrified silhouette. The arrogance was gone. The master of the universe posture was gone. He looked small. He looked like a child who had been caught stealing from the cookie jar, only to realize the jar was full of scorpions. I can fix this, Derek whispered, his eyes darting around the room. I can call the bank. I can tell them it was an error. Howard, you can help me. We can draft a retraction. I cannot help you, Derek, Howard said, standing up for the first time. I am an officer of the court. When I am presented with irrefutable evidence of a felony and progress forgery, fraud, and attempted theft of an estate, I have a legal and ethical obligation. What obligation? Tiffany whispered. To report it, Howard said. Derek lunged toward the table. Give me the papers, he screamed, reaching for the fake power of attorney and the fake receipts. Give them to me. I grabbed my file and stepped back. Howard didn't flinch. He just placed his hand firmly on top of the evidence. It is too late, Derek, Howard said. At that exact moment, the heavy oak doors of the conference room swung open. The timing was so precise it felt scripted, but I knew it wasn't. It was simply the inevitable consequence of actions set in motion hours ago. 2 men walked in. They were not wearing suits like Derek's. They wore cheap, durable polyester suits. They had the tired, hard look of men who spent their days dealing with bad people. They didn't say a word at first. They just stood in the doorway, scanning the room. One of them, the taller one, had a gold badge clipped to his belt. The room froze. My mother stopped crying. Tiffany stopped breathing. Derek stopped moving. The taller man looked at the photo of Derek on the projector screen, the one where he looked like a visionary leader. Then he looked at the sweating, shaking man standing by the window. Derek Bennett, the detective asked. It wasn't a question. It was a confirmation. I stood by the door, my hand resting on the envelope I still hadn't opened, the envelope that contained Grandpa's final voice. I looked at Derek. He looked back at me, and in his eyes, I saw the realization hit him. He hadn't just lost the money. He hadn't just lost the houses. He had lost his freedom. And the sister he had called emotional and unimportant was the one who had just handed the map to the police. The air in the room did not just change. It solidified. It became a physical weight that pressed down on every single person sitting at the mahogany table. The arrival of the police is usually loud, chaotic, and filled with sirens. But here, in the hushed, carpeted world of high-end corporate law, it was terrifyingly quiet. The taller officer, the one with the badge that caught the light of the projector, stepped fully into the room. He looked at Derek, not with anger, but with the weary patience of a man who had seen 1,000 men in expensive suits try to steal things that did not belong to them. I am Detective Lauren Pike, the woman beside him said. Her voice was sharp, clear, and professional. This is Detective Mateo Vargas. We are with the Financial Crimes Unit of the Hollowcrest Police Department. Derek let out a laugh. It was a wet, breathless sound. He wiped his forehead, smearing the sweat. Officers, Derek said, trying to summon the ghost of his CEO persona. This is a private family meeting. There must be some mistake. We are just discussing legacy planning. If you could give us a moment. There is no mistake. Mr. Bennett, Detective Pike said. She walked further into the room, her heels clicking on the hardwood border of the floor. She did not look at the rest of the family. She was focused entirely on my brother. "We are here regarding a report filed this morning concerning forgery, the uttering of a forged instrument, and attempted bank fraud. Report?" Derek's eyes darted to me, then to Howard. "Who reported me? You cannot just barge in here based on hearsay." Howard Klein stood up. He adjusted his suit jacket. He looked at Derek with a profound, final disappointment. "It was not hearsay, Derek," Howard said. "I sent the file to the district attorney at 8 o'clock this morning." Derek looked like he had been punched in the gut. You are the family lawyer." "I am the attorney for the estate of Walter Bennett," Howard corrected, his voice like ice. "My duty is to the estate and to the law. When you submitted that invoice from the bankrupt maintenance company earlier this week, I became suspicious. When I saw the loan application alert this morning, I became obligated." Howard pointed to the fake power of attorney document still lying on the table. "And now," Howard continued, "you have attempted to pass a forged legal document in the presence of witnesses. That is a felony committed in real time." "It is not forged," Tiffany screamed. Jumping up, she grabbed Derek's arm, her fingernails digging into his suit. "Tell them, Derek. Tell them Grandpa signed it." Derek opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked at the detectives, then at the document, then at me. He was drowning, and there was no life raft. "I think," I said, breaking my silence, "it is time to hear from the only person whose opinion actually matters." I picked up the sealed envelope. The heavy cream-colored paper felt warm in my hands. The wax seal, stamped with Grandpa's initials, was unbroken. "What is that?" Detective Vargas asked, looking at me. "This," I said, "is an affidavit and letter of instruction. My grandfather, Walter Bennett, wrote it the day he transferred the properties to my LLC. He had it notarized, sealed, and he made me promise not to open it unless Derek tried to claim ownership." I looked at Derek. "You wanted to know what Grandpa really thought. You wanted to know his vision." I broke the seal. The sound of the thick paper tearing was loud in the silence. Rip! I pulled out the document. It was 3 pages long. I skipped the legal preamble and went straight to the section Grandpa had highlighted in his own hand. "To my family," I read aloud. My voice did not shake. "If you are reading this, it means that my grandson, Derek Bennett, has attempted to contest the transfer of my properties to my granddaughter, Ivy. It means he has likely presented documents claiming I gave him authority. Let me be clear." I looked up. My mother was holding her breath. Aunt Loretta was staring at the floor. I continued reading. "I, Walter Bennett, being of sound mind, state unequivocally that I have never granted Derek Bennett power of attorney. I have never granted him management rights. I have withheld these responsibilities because I have observed, over the last 4 years, that Derek views my tenants as revenue streams rather than human beings." Derek flinched. The words were a slap from the grave. "I further instruct my attorney, Howard Klein," I read, "that if Derek Bennett presents any claim for reimbursement, any invoice for repair, or any document purporting to be signed by me after the date of November 1st, it is to be treated as a fraudulent attempt to defraud the estate. I instruct Mr. Klein to immediately contact the authorities and press full charges." The room gasped. Grandpa hadn't just given me the houses. He had set a bear trap. He knew Derek's nature so well that he had predicted the crime before it happened. "And finally," I said, turning to the last page, "regarding the remaining personal assets, the cash, the furniture, the car, I have included a no-contest clause." I looked at Aunt Loretta. I looked at the cousins. "Clause 4, I read. "If any beneficiary contests the validity of the transfer of real estate to Ironwood Holdings, or supports any legal challenge against Ivy Harrison regarding said transfer, they shall immediately forfeit their share of the residuary estate. Their portion shall be donated to the Hollow Crest Animal Shelter." The effect was instantaneous. Aunt Loretta, who had been shouting about fighting me 5 minutes ago, clamped her mouth shut. Uncle Bob took a step away from Derek. The cousins lowered their eyes. In 10 seconds, Grandpa had stripped Derek of every ally in the room. Nobody was going to risk their $5,000 to save a man who was already sinking. Derek stood alone by the window. He looked at the family he had tried to lead, and he saw only their backs. "Derek Bennett," Detective Vargas said, stepping forward and pulling a pair of metal handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for forgery, uttering a forged instrument, identity theft, and bank fraud."
"No," Derek whispered. "No, please, I can fix it. I just need time."
"Turn around,"
Vargas said. Derek didn't move. He looked at me. His eyes were wet, terrified, pleading. "Ivy, tell them, I am your brother. You cannot let them take me." I looked at him. I remembered the way he had smirked when he cut my stipend. I remembered the text message to Mrs. Vega threatening to throw her onto the street. I remembered the 4 years he spent playing golf while I cleaned Grandpa's oxygen filters. "I am not doing this to you, Derek," I said softly. "You did this to yourself. You signed your own name on the fake paper. You sent the emails. You applied for the loan." "Ivy!" he shouted as Vargas grabbed his wrist and spun him around. Click! The sound of the handcuffs locking was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Click! "You have the right to remain silent," Detective Pike recited, her voice a monotone drone. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Tiffany lunged forward again. "You cannot take him. He has a reputation. He is a businessman." "Ma'am," Detective Pike said, holding up a hand, "unless you want to be charged as an accessory to fraud for knowing about this scheme, I suggest you step back." Tiffany froze. She looked at Derek, who was now bent over the table, humiliated, cuffed, and broken. Then she looked at the detective. She stepped back. She let go of Derek's arm. She chose herself. My mother let out a wail. It was a sound of pure heartbreak. She reached out toward Derek as they began to march him toward the door. "My boy. My baby." Derek didn't look at her. He kept his head down. He couldn't face the audience he had assembled for his triumph, only to have them witness his destruction. As they passed me, Derek paused for a fraction of a second. He didn't say anything. He just breathed out, a shuddering, terrified breath, and then he was gone. The detectives led him out into the hallway. The heavy doors swung shut behind them. The room was left in ruins. Papers were scattered everywhere, the fake deeds, the fake receipts, the lies. My mother was sobbing into the table. Tiffany was frantically typing on her phone, probably calling her own lawyer to distance herself from her husband. Aunt Loretta was sitting in stunned silence, calculating if she could still get her check. I walked over to the table. I didn't touch the fake papers. I reached past them and picked up the single page of the affidavit that Grandpa had signed. I folded it carefully. I put it in my bag. "Ivy," my mother whispered. She looked up at me, her makeup running, her face aged by 10 years in 10 minutes. How could you let them take him? We are family." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had told me to be practical, the woman who had told me to stop dreaming and be more like Derek. "I didn't break this family. Mom," I said. My voice was calm. I felt lighter than I had in years. "I just stopped letting the family break me." I turned to Howard Klein. "Thank you, Howard," I said. "I trust you will handle the rest of the distribution according to the clause, to the letter, Ivy." Howard said. He gave me a rare, genuine smile. "Your grandfather would have been proud. You didn't just keep the promise, you enforced it." I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder. I didn't say goodbye to Tiffany. I didn't say goodbye to the cousins. They were strangers to me now, people who shared blood but not values. I walked to the door. I opened it and stepped out into the hallway. The air was cool and smelled of floor wax, not lies. I walked to the elevator. As the doors closed, shutting out the sight of the conference room forever, I touched the bag where the deed to Mrs. Vega's house sat safely next to my camera. Grandpa was right. In this world, promises can be twisted, words can be manipulated, and people can pretend to be things they are not. But a signature that follows the law, that is iron, and iron does not bend. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from your car, your office, or maybe while doing chores at home? Please comment down below and let's get a conversation started. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please make sure to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can get this story out to even more people who need a little victory in their day.